All right, so the big moment has arrived. I am ready to bead roll the main panel for the trunk floor pan. I have this piece of sheet metal here that we have traced the outline of the panel onto, and we've left it a bit oversized, which helps when you're bead rolling so that the panel doesn't change shape as much, and then you do the final trimming after the fact. And then we have our designs scribed out here. The first couple I did with some layout fluid so that you could see it easier, but then I figured I didn't really need that. It matches up with our template over here that we have made, and we went with the X instead of the kind of L shape to box it in. And then I also added another X in the middle here, so this thing should be nice and sturdy and aesthetically pleasing when we're done with it. And again, these elements right here meet up with the little frame rail stubbies that I made, and these go about like that. This is the bottom side, so this will be upside down, and then this will get welded to the panel here. And these are made and spaced out in such a way as to line up with the recesses in the factory fuel tank here, and we'll be putting some like 1/4 inch thick rubber or foam between the frame rails and the tank, and then we'll be building some straps to strap it up underneath. So this, we still need to add some nut certs or something like that to this so that the tank has somewhere to bolt, and this will actually be welded to the floor pan after the floor pan is put in the car and fit and everything like that. Just because of how it is, this is actually going to sandwich between the framing in the trunk and then the floor pan here. We'll kind of sandwich that together and create some stronger connections right there. So like I said, we are ready to start the daunting task of bead rolling this panel. Now it's going to be really hard because everything except for what's in the middle is going to need to be bead rolled from both sides. And what I mean by that is I have this Jamie Jordan edition Mittler Brothers bead roller, and it has the 36-inch throat depth, which is the biggest throat depth, but this panel's 46 inches long. And so when we're bead rolling some elements like these down here and you're curving the corner, the other edge of the panel is actually going to run into the throat. To be able to get around that, what we'll have to do is bead roll everything that we can on this side, which we will be raising all of these elements because we want them to be recessed when the floor pan is installed, so we have a nice flat floor pan, nothing is sticking up above it. So we're going to be raising all of these, and the areas that we can't reach doing it this way on the bead roller because of the interference with the throat, we'll have to flip the panel over, scribe some new lines, or mark some new lines at least, and then we'll have to push that part of the panel down. So we'll have to switch our dies around most likely, and we'll have to actually scribe different lines than these. These are 1.5 inches wide, but if you're doing, say, an 1/8 inch step, then that comes down to 1.25 inches wide on the recessed or raised portion, however you're looking at it. And so when we flip the panel over, we have to take that into account actually. It took a lot of time to lay all of this out, about an hour, and so if I screw this panel up, it's going to be a whole day just to make this panel. And so everything about this is making me anxious here, but I think what we're going to do is we're just going to get started. We're going to start bead rolling this son of a bitch. Alright, so the bead rolling on the floor pan for the trunk is done. I'm happy with how the bead rolling itself turned out, even though it was a little precarious. As you saw and I explained earlier, the material was running into the throat of the machine, so there's only so much I was able to bead roll from the bottom side, and then I had to flip it over and bead roll the rest, because that basically puts the piece of material 180 degrees off, and it won't be running into the machine. So I had to finish a lot of the little radiuses and other parts with it flipped over, and that's always hard because you have this step and you need to take that into account when you go on the other side to draw your lines to follow. On the bottom side, I ended up using a scribe, which scratches the material, but it's going to be on the bottom, so it was kind of a compromise there, but it's a really crisp line that you can see. But then when I flipped it over, I had to use a brand new Sharpie to mark all this stuff, and that's a lot harder to be super precise with. But all of the radiuses look pretty good, some of them look great. I'm happy with that. The problem is I wanted it to be pretty shallow. The deeper that you roll a feature, the more distortion it creates, because that material has to come from somewhere, so it's basically shrinking the panel. I wanted to bead roll it really shallow so that there was a lot less distortion, plus it's getting covered up with carpet. I took a test piece and I figured out what a good depth was, and then I backed it off 5 turns so that I knew when I put this panel in to go 5 turns and it would create that depth. Well, of course, this is 20 gauge and the piece I grabbed must have been 18 gauge or something thicker.
Well, obviously,
because this piece rolled out a lot deeper than the test piece. I did not want to roll the panel out this deep, but once I went down the first line, you're pretty much stuck at that point. Otherwise, you're going to have one section that's deeper than the rest, and that's not gonna work. So I was pretty much stuck with that. And so at that point, I was like, well, let's just bead roll this whole thing out, and let's see how it looks. Now that it's done, the bead rolling looks fine, but the problem is the panel distorted quite a bit, and you can see that right here. So that's all the material when this X and the rest of the features are bead rolled. Like I said, that material has to come from somewhere. Right now, I'm really trying to figure out what direction I'm gonna go with this. One of the things is with the panel that I made for the gas tank mount, which mounts on the underside of this, because this is the top side, but it basically mounts right like that, where this panel, you can see, matches up with here, just to add a little strength to it. Once these two get welded together, it will help with some of the wobbliness of the panel a little bit, but it's not going to be the end all for it. I don't know, right now I'm really just considering what I'm going to do. One thing I'm thinking of is going up a gauge size or two to have this thicker, since this is the trunk pan itself, and you know, there'll be maybe luggage on it at some point, or I'll have to, you know, throw something in the back, and thicker material is going to distort a little bit less than the thinner. That'll be a plus, and then I'll be able to not bead roll as deep on the next one, because I didn't want to bead roll this deep. I'll have to go to the material store and buy the material. I'm not worried about the cost, it's just the time I wasted on this. And that's fine too. You know, the bead roller is probably the worst way to do something like this to a floor pan. It's the easiest, it's the cheapest, but it doesn't, you need to either pre-stretch it, so you'd go along with a hammer and actually stretch the material where you're going to bead roll it, so that when the bead roll creates that pleat, it has a stretched area to recess. So yeah, this is kind of one of those big motivation killers where you're just rolling with the project, and then, you know, you just want to move on to the next part and keep rolling, and you're throwing a little bit of a wrench like this, and so not sure what I'm gonna do. You'll find out.
Give him a good rap. It's a good way to take out your frustrations. It's better than fighting with your spouse or kicking the puppy dog.